Today I'm going to talk about some of the work that we are doing with invasive annual grasses and herbicides. I work for the Department of Natural Resources in the Range Agroforestry program for Confederated tribes of Umatilla and Reservation. So a little overview of what I'll be talking about today. I'll be briefly going over the impacts of invasive annual grasses, the herbicide options, specifically Rejuva or Adazaflam, and then the potential or unknown ecological and health impacts. First of all, I guess I'll just let you know where we're located. We're located in Northeast Oregon, and our seeded area covers Southeast Washington and Northeast Oregon. And we're the Confederation of Umatilla and Walla Cayuse tribes. So invasive annual grasses are one of the greatest challenges in the rangelands that landmanners are facing. And the dominant three are cheatgrass, medusa head, and ventonata. And so invasive annual grasses outcompete native plants, including first foods, cultural important plants. They reduce biodiversity across the landscape, also reducing forage quality for both livestock and wildlife. They alter fire cycles, modify both water availability and nutrient cycling. So on the Umatilla Indian Reservation, we manage about a little over 76,000 acres of rangeland and grazable woodlands. So we have about 15 range units. And so we manage for livestock grazing, but also for first foods. And so in 2009, we completed a rangeland inventory, and what we found was that annual grasses were present on all of our 15 range units. And so we attempted to address that issue by doing a change of season use in a couple of range units to increase the use of annual grasses and reduce, grazing intensity on native perennial plants during the growing season. But what we found in 2021 when we did our range inventory, we showed declines in rain conditions. And we're not sure if that's because of our management or other factors. And so we wanted to look at, herbicide options for addressing invasive annual grasses in the range units. And there's a few available. Rejuva, which is, just came out in 2020, became available. It's a pre-emergent, and it has a long residual. Plateau or Mazapic is pre and post-emergent, and it's selective with water residual. And then there's glyphosate, which is non-selective, and this is where you have no native plants left, and then you are reseeding that. And so we want to combine our targeted grazing with, and we feel it's more effective if we use it in combination with other treatments. So we're hoping to combine it with herbicides. So since Rejuva is new, we started looking closer at that. It provides a long-lasting control of invasive annual grasses and broadleaf species. And so our target is cheatgrass, medusa head, and ventonata. And so some of the benefits of using Rejuva is a consistent long-term weed control, up to 4 seasons of control. And some research is showing even longer than up to 7 of invasive grasses, depending on the weather, grazing pressures, and other factors. It releases the perennial native vegetation, so the perennial plants respond positively and quickly to additional water and nutrients that become available when invasive grasses are controlled. There's no grazing restrictions as long as you're planting at a rate of 5 ounces per acre. There's reduced time and labor costs, so you have fewer applications that are needed to control the weeds. And then there's flexible tank mixing. It can be mixed with both pre and post emergent herbicides. So if it requires rainfall to activate it, and so you may miss that window, and you may have some emergence of your target species, and so you can add like a Mazapic, or if you're addressing other forbs, you can add that to the mix as well. And so we wanted to look more closely at what are the ecological responses. So we met with NView representatives, and we also were looking and attending meetings and workshops about what kind of results other people were getting with Rejuva. So Rejuva So I'll talk a little bit about a couple of studies. Rejuva can temporarily affect native perennial grasses and forbs, but what they're seeing is some of them are seeing that they're unlikely to have long-term impacts on diversity of native plant communities. So this cheatgrass study saw long-term reduction in cheatgrass without negative effects to the native species richness. Similar with this long-term response with Vetnata. In Montana, they found that Rejuva reduced Vetnata to cover to 0 or close to 0 for up to 1 to 3 years and even up to 6 years with a single application. But they did see annual forb and species richness were lowest after the second year, but then we're back to similar to the other treatments in their study. And then this is a kind of a main concern for us is Rejuva is persistent in the upper layer of soil, and it may affect seed banks for other functional groups of vegetation. And so Meyer-Moyer found that Rejuva affects new recruitment of native perennials that rely on the seed banks in the soil. So we partnered with Oregon State University, who's leading this research project, as well as the Nature Conservancy and Oregon Department of Agriculture, looking at native plant community response to Rejuva and the effects on species richness and diversity in Eastern Oregon or Northeastern Oregon. So given the number of different species present on rangelands, it's more investigation on non-target species and tolerances and their long-term responses to Rejuva is needed. And so we're seeing increased use of herbicides to combat invasive animal greases in our area. BLM just was recently approved, so we'll be seeing more use of it on federal lands that tribal members use to gather foods. The impacts to native plants are unknown, specifically roots and celery. So this study seeks to document the effects of Rejuva on roots, celeries, and other native plants. So what are the effects of one-time applications on the following variables is what we'll be looking at this study: the cultural significant food plants, forb richness and diversity, vegetation composition and structure, and then of course annual grass abundance at each of these sites. So we've got 4 research plots, 2 on tribal land, so 1 on a reservation and range unit 8, and then McCoy Meadows, which is a wildlife management area, and then Arrowleaf Farms and Zumwalt Prairie. So all these sites requirements that they had presence of first foods. So in 2024, we did a spring and summer pre-treatment sampling. So with first foods, you don't do the same timing as standard rangeland inventory. So we're out there in May, early April, May, and then July. And then fall of 2024, we did the herbicide application, and then we'll resample for 3 years post-treatment. And so another concern that we have is human health with the use of Rejuva. And so we had a couple questions. So what are the potential impacts or the toxicity of Rejuva associated with harvesting, preparation and consumption of first foods in treated areas? When the gatherers are out there gathering, if they are in the treated area, they'll be breaking through that shallow soil to get to deeper roots, but we have other roots that are shallow rooted that could potentially be in that zone of Rejuva, and then they're putting these roots into a bag and the soil's still attached. It's now into their bags, and then they bring it back to their home and they're cleaning with their hands and then consuming those. So we wanted to, get that answer to that. And then what's the length of time that trial members have to wait till they can harvest in these areas that have been treated safely? And so to answer this question, we worked with NView and Oregon State University to pursue a IR4 project. And this was a project that established by USDA and land-grant universities to ensure that especially crop farmers had legal access to safe and effective crop protection products. And so in culture important plants, they meet the eligibility definition for a specialty crop. So to be eligible, you must be cultivated or managed or used by people for food medicinal purposes to be considered a specialty crop. But we were unsuccessful in getting this project selected for this IF4 project. So right now, what we're doing is working internally with our environmental toxicologists and see how we can answer that question ourselves internally. And then for the second question of, since we won't have that answer, we want to know what's the extent of rejuva use in our seeded areas. And you can see on this map that the green and the gray are Forest Service and BLM lands. So a lot of tribal members gather off the reservation on these public lands and private lands. And currently we are notified by both BLM and Forest Service of their the proposed invasive species treatment areas. And then we share those with tribal members. But with rejuva being new to both these public lands, we're hoping to have them consultate with us prior to planned use of rejuva to determine the potential absence or presence of first foods in those treatment areas. And then when rejuva is applied, there should be, continued tribal notification of all areas being treated as well as signage. So we're hoping for like long-term signage so that tribal members are aware that these areas have been treated so they can avoid those areas and find other areas until we can get, further information on impacts. And then another thing that we're considering is harvest restrictions. So we've met with NView and asked them, how long can we go back into these treated areas, won't have any harmful impacts. And they feel confident that the chemical adheres to the soil, there is no issues, but they did provide us that, that we should wait maybe 22 months following application. But looking at the research, I mean, it could be up to 7 years that rejuva is still present in the soil. So NView had discussed adding this to the label. So in situations where naturally occurring rangeland food plants are regularly harvested for human consumption, do not harvest for 22 months following application. And this is the same direction they give. If you want to reseed the area, you wait 22 months. For agriculture areas, they also ask you to wait 22 months before you replant like root crops or any kind of agricultural crop in those areas. And so in closing, I think that, rejuva and herbicide application is a good management tool that can reliably reduce invasive annual grass abundance in rangelands. But however, I think land managers need to consider the potential for non-target impacts and then trade-offs when making these treatment decisions. We initially identified 1,000 acres that we wanted to treat, but once we found out more information, we decided to hold off, wait till we hear back from these ecological studies and potentially human health impacts. And so what we've been doing is treating small areas that we know no first foods are found on the reservation, within the range units. And I think that before we treat, because annual invasive grasses are definitely negatively impacting first foods. They're choking out, root gathering areas. So it's important that we address the annual grass issue. But I think that before we do, treat large areas where there's foods, I think that we plan to meet with the tribal community and are they okay for waiting up to 7 years on an area? Do we just so it's just something that in the future that we need to address. But it's definitely something to consider before treating large areas with rejuva that potentially have first food gathering areas for the tribe and other tribes as well. So that's my presentation. I appreciate the opportunity to share information on invasive annual grasses and herbicide, specifically rejuva.